Today's date is May 6, 2014. The time is 10:01 a.m. This is the videotaped deposition of Andrew Eisenzimmer. Will counsel please identify themselves for the video record?
For the plaintiff, Jeff Anderson.
For the plaintiff, Mike Finnegan.
Dan Haas for the Archdiocese.
Thomas Brown on behalf of the Diocese of Winona.
Tom Weiser on behalf of the Archdiocese.
Will the reporter please swear the witness?
Do swear the testimony you're about to give relative to the cause now under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you please state the full name for the record?
Andrew Eisenzimmer.
What is your current association or affiliation with the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis?
I'm currently employed by the Archdiocese on a part-time basis as a consultant.
And to whom do you answer as a consultant?
Largely to Mr. Weiser as their outside counsel and to the current Chancellor for Civil Affairs.
And that is?
Joseph Kippers.
You were the Chancellor for Civil Affairs from November of 2005 to October 2012?
Actually, it would have been through December of 2012.
And have you then been a consultant since December of 2012?
Correct.
What do you do as a consultant?
Well, at the moment, it's largely consulting with respect to outstanding litigation that involves the Archdiocese.
Do you get called in if there's a crisis?
Typically not, but I don't know that there's been a crisis per se. I think in the last year and a half I've been in the Chancery a couple of times for meetings.
Were you called in to deal with a problem involving Waymire
Well,
after your retirement?
No.
Okay. Are you responsible for dealing as a consultant primarily with issues pertaining to handling sexual abuse issues?
That's the predominant litigation involving the Archdiocese at the moment, yes.
Have you yourself ever reported suspicions of childhood sexual abuse by a cleric to any law enforcement agency?
Yes.
How many times?
Involving a cleric, there's been at least a few, I believe.
Do you consider yourself currently or as Chancellor from 2005 to December of 2012 to be or to have been a mandatory reporter?
No.
Have you ever considered yourself to be a mandatory reporter?
No.
Okay. The few times that you have made reports to law enforcement of suspicions of childhood sexual abuse by clerics, I want to ask you about that. When have you done that?
Well, I would be talking about that period of time when I was employed as the Chancellor for Civil Affairs between November 7, 2005 and December 31, 2012.
Okay. And tell me then the first time in that time frame in which you made a report.
Well, I'm not sure that I remember exactly the chronological order, but I'm guessing the first one I would have been involved with was relating to Father Michael Keating. But when you talk about report, I don't know that we treated Father Keating, the report of Father Keating matter to the police as a mandated report. Sometimes we report voluntarily as opposed to anything that would be considered mandated under the statute.
What do you consider to be a mandated report versus a non-mandated report?
Well,
what is a mandated report as you understand it?
If you look at Minnesota Statute 626.556, you recognize that only certain professionals and certain clergy are considered mandated reporters. And if you look at clergy specifically, they're not mandated reporters if the information came to them that's otherwise privileged under Minnesota Statutes 595.02. In addition, the statute...
That's in the priest-penitent privilege, basically.
Correct.
Okay.
And the statute also specifies that reports are mandated if they're currently occurring or have occurred within the preceding 3 years. So anything outside that time frame would not be considered a mandated reporting obligation situation.
So in the case of Keating, did you not consider that to have been a required report by statute?
Correct. And again, largely because of the time frame.
And it was because it was alleged to have occurred more than 3 years before the information was received by you?
Correct.
How long before? When did you receive the information that caused you to be suspicious of childhood sexual abuse?
By Keating?
Yes.
I think I learned of that almost from the time I walked into the chancery, just about. It was shortly after I started in November of 2005.
And from whom did you learn that he was suspected?
I think I first heard of that from Father Jeff Heward.
And what did Father Heward tell you?
I think he largely described his, I guess it's his niece, as having had some instances with Father Keating prior to Father Keating's ordination as a priest, where she was now describing some contact with Father Keating as sexual in nature.
So he was describing to you that he understood it to be sexual contact between Keating and her as a minor, correct?
Correct. Although it was a little confusing because Father Heward said that her story had changed from the time she had first spoken to him to some later times in terms of the manner in which she was describing what had occurred.
But it was nonetheless suspicious of sexual abuse of a minor by Father Keating, correct?
In the fairest sense of that description, yes.
Okay. And did you take any action responsive to what Father Heward told you about the information he had concerning the abuse by Keating, the alleged abuse by Keating of the minor?
Well, I think originally Father Heward was, if I recall correctly, was seeking to contact Father McDonough to discuss that. And if I recall correctly, I don't think Father McDonough was available, and that's how he ended up talking with me. But I arranged to get a hold of Father McDonough right away to get some direction from him in terms of what he wanted to do with that situation.
In terms of the he, you mean what Father McDonough wanted to do as the then Vicar General?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Did you consider that to be, at that time, McDonough's primary responsibility versus yours to deal with it?
Well, since I was rather new at the job, that wasn't necessarily very clear, but I think all of us in the Chancery recognized that we had obligations to respond when we learned of some kind of misconduct. In this particular situation, it was made more complex by the fact that the instances that were being described had occurred prior to the ordination of Father Keating. And so I got a hold of Father McDonough as quickly as I could to say, what do you want to do here? What options do we want to discuss, and what action do we want to take?
In terms of protecting minors and the mandatory reporting statute, however, it really doesn't draw a distinction between somebody pre-seminary, post-seminary, cleric, non-cleric, does it?
Correct, but as I noted earlier, this was outside of the mandatory reporting period, so there was that consideration. But in terms of protecting children, it's helpful to make sure that there is not an instance where the conduct can be repeated.
In your view, when you say it was outside the mandatory reporting period, how long ago had the alleged abuse occurred before you received the information from Father Heward that it may have occurred?
And as I sit here today, I don't recall how much earlier the events in question had occurred.
Well, you're asserting, however, that it must have been more than 3 years before you received it. Otherwise, you would have, it would have been a mandated report, correct?
Well, I didn't view myself, and never have, as a mandated reporter, but certainly Father Heward was potentially a mandated reporter as a member of the clergy, although it wasn't clear at that point in time whether his conversation with his niece was considered privileged or not. So, but ultimately, in the discussions with Father McDonough, we decided that the best course of action was to report that to police authorities.
Well, first, let's get the privilege settled. If it's a priest penitent privilege protected by statute, that means confidential. Father Heward cannot share that with you, correct?
Well, yeah,
that
I mean,
correct?
he was not suggesting that there was any privilege that existed there.
Okay,
Right,
good.
exactly.
Let's just get that correct. So we don't have a privilege issue there.
Right.
Okay. So my question to you is, when did Father Heward share this information with you?
Well, again, I mean, it was sometime either November, December 2005, I believe.
Okay. And did you make any memorandum or recording of what he told you he had understood Keating had done to the girl?
I don't know that I did, but I may have prepared a memorandum to someone that would have detailed some of that information.
Today you have no recollection of having recorded anything in connection with that conversation?
I have a recollection of I would have taken notes and those kinds of things. Whether I then memorialized that in a memorandum, I don't know.
When you took notes as the chancellor, such as you just referred, what would have happened to those notes, and what file would they have been put in and retained?
Well, typically, I would not retain handwritten notes. Usually those would be just scratching of highlighted words or something like that, which oftentimes would be indecipherable at a later point. Normally what I would do, or at least what I developed as a practice in that office, was to then draft a written memorandum if it was something that needed to be memorialized.
And as you testified today, you don't actually recall if you recorded anything, however, is that
I don't,
correct?
and at times it's also possible that I would have memorialized things of that nature, and perhaps in an email as well, as opposed to a memorandum.
And so, as best you can recall today then, how long before you got the information from Heward concerning Keating's conduct towards the girl did you believe it had occurred?
I don't recall, as I said here, how long ago, how long prior to my talking with Father Heward the events had occurred.
And you told me, I think, that you did not consider the information given you, you considered to have been suspicious of sexual abuse, but not mandated as a report. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if I'm following you, but the fair reading of what Father Heward was describing was sexual abuse.
Yes.
But I didn't view it as falling within the statutory language to require mandated reporting.
Did you communicate that to Father McDonough?
I don't recall that I did. I know we certainly would have discussed the idea of reporting it to the police.
And was a report made to the police?
Yes,
By whom?
me.
How long after Father Heward gave you the information was a report made to the police?
Again, I don't recall exactly how long, and there was some problem because there was some confusion where the family lived at the time. So we reported to one police department who then did some investigation and found out it was actually under the jurisdiction of another one, and I think they actually referred it to the appropriate jurisdiction.
So how long after you received the information from Heward did you first make the effort to report to any law enforcement agency?
I don't know. I don't recall the amount of time. I mean, I think it was just days.
Do you know if you made any record of when the report was actually made?
Again, there's a possibility that an email or a memorandum exists about when that was made, but as I sit here, I don't recall that.
Okay. And when you said you have a practice you may have made notes of what Father Hewitt told you, did you make notes of having made a report to law enforcement?
Again, I don't know if I made notes or if I would have memorialized that in a memorandum or an email. Normally something like that, I would create something to inform the Vicar General, the Archbishop, or whoever else would need to be informed about what action steps I had taken.
When you said it was your practice to throw away notes, why would you do that?
Well, again, they were really just a quick, couple of key words or something like that. It isn't something you could necessarily follow or understand. It would be more to help me put it in a form that others could follow and understand.
Well, as a Chancellor for Civil Affairs and given your history in this area, wasn't it also, was you also aware that when you actually received the information that may have triggered a report, it was important?
Oh, absolutely, and that's why I would normally then memorialize that in a fashion that then could be placed in a file to memorialize what I had done on what particular date and what action steps had been taken.
Beyond having made, after you received the information from Father Heward, you referred it to Kevin McDonough because he was the Vicar General and the one charged by the Archbishop to basically be handling sexual abuse allegations, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And let me correct something now that I'm recalling better the memory of that event. I think originally I didn't hear from Father Heward. I think I actually originally heard from Father Andrew Cousins at some point, who was relating the stuff that he had gotten from Father Heward. And if I recall correctly, because of Father Heward's relationship with the young woman, he wanted to step out of his leadership role with the, I can't remember, the servants of whatever that group was that they all belonged to. I can't remember the name of it.
Companions of Christ?
Companions of Christ.
Yeah.
And so I think he asked Father Cousins to actually be in touch with me. So I think the information I got was probably even secondhand from Father Cousins.
In any case,
initially, I ultimately did talk to Father Heward.
In any case, there was enough information in Father Cousins and or Heward that it was a report of suspicions of sexual abuse of the girl, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you may have made notes, but you don't recall today whether you did or not of the conversation you had with Cousins and or Heward, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And was it a routine practice for you to memorialize information like received by you like this?
Well, as I say, these events were unfolding within days or certainly a couple of weeks of my starting that position. But certainly as time went on, that was the practice that I had, was to do something, and then if it was important that we needed to keep a record of that, I would then put it in either a memorandum or an email of some sort. At the time we're talking about in late 2005, I don't think Father McDonough was using email at that time, so more than likely I would have done something in the form of a memorandum as opposed to an email to him.
Would that have been copied to the Archbishop? It would have then been Flynn?
If it was copied to the Archbishop, it would have been Archbishop Flynn. Whether I copied him, I would not have a recollection at this time.
In any case, you do recall having turned it over to Father McDonough, correct?
I wouldn't say turn it over to him. I took it to him for some direction. What did he want to do? How did he want to do it? There's a variety of issues that needed to be addressed, and so he's the person I would take that work direction from. He's both the Vicar General, in essence the Chief of Staff. He's also the moderator of the Curia, which means he's responsible for the Archbishop's curial staff. I was a member of the curial staff.
Well, this is a report of possible sexual abuse of a minor.
Correct.
Who, if any, is charged with investigating that at that time?
Well, clearly, I think it's up to Father McDonough to decide, what should be done in terms of any investigation of it at that time.
Do you recall what information you actually gave to Father McDonough when you initially imparted it to him?
I think I probably would have shared with him virtually everything I would have gotten from either Father Heward or Father Cousins.
And what happened?
Father McDonough and I decided it would be appropriate to report it to police authorities. And then relative to the status of Father Keating, I think Father McDonough took that over. I didn't have any responsibility for those decisions.
And so did you have any other involvement in the Keating matter after having discussed it with McDonough and made the decision with him to report?
Well, I think there was a number of occasions that I was dealing with the police, and then there was this question about who had the jurisdiction, so that was a few things. Ultimately, I was actually talking, I think, with the family themselves, and ultimately the Archbishop decided to refer the matter to the Clergy Review Board to help him ascertain the credibility of the allegations or the substance of the allegations, and part of my job was to serve as staff liaison to the Clergy Review Board, so I would have been involved at that point in time as well.
Right. I'm not going to use the name of the girl, but do you remember the name of the girl?
I don't at this point.
You don't need to state it, but
yeah.
you did mention that you did interview some of the family members. Did you actually interview the girl who was was alleged to have abused?
Well, I was present when she spoke to the Clergy Review Board. I don't know that I talked with her directly. I did view a videotape that she had prepared.
Okay. And as you testified today, you don't recall actually having interviewed her?
I'm certain I would have not asked her specifics about the events in question. I didn't question her. I didn't interrogate her. I would not have had any conversation of that nature with her.
Okay. You did mention that you interviewed some family members, however. And what purpose did you do that?
And again, it wouldn't have been. It would have been just in terms of what are we doing. The police are involved, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't trying to get further information or any interrogation kind of stuff. It was just more of what's the status, what's happening, et cetera, et cetera.
So it was your purpose in contacting the family members to report the status of the Archdiocese investigation and what was going to be done, or what?
I think as time went on, it was more them contacting me saying, what is the Archdiocese doing? I think they were also working with Greta Sawyer, who was the Director of Advocacy and the Victims Assistance Coordinator. So I think largely they were dealing with her, but at times I would get a call from the young lady's father inquiring about what we were doing and what the status was. And at some point in time, they learned that the matter had gone to the Clergy Review Board, and so I think they were anxious to find out, when they would have an opportunity to meet with the Clergy Review Board and set up those kinds of things.
So there was, did you interview Father Keating to find out his version of the sexual abuse allegation?
I did not interview Father Keating. Again, I was present, I believe, when he spoke to the Clergy Review Board and discussed that.
But before he appeared before the Clergy Review Board, where you were present, do you know if anybody ever asked Keating from the Archdiocese if he had abused this girl?
I don't know what the police might have asked him, or whether he spoke to the police.
From the Archdiocese?
Yeah, I don't know that. I became aware in some fashion that he was denying that he had had any sexual contact with her, but that's all I learned. And I didn't learn that from him until he actually spoke to the review board.
You did do some investigation, however, and made an effort to contact some of the other potential victims of Keating that had been mentioned as potential victims, did you not?
There was one woman that there was a suggestion that he may have been involved with in some fashion that lived in Italy, so I tried to contact her.
That you did contact her in some manner, did you not?
By email, I did.
And you asked her if she had been sexually abused by Keating, did you not?
Well, yeah, she sent me a message asking me what I wanted to talk about on the telephone. She sent me a message asking what I was inquiring about, and so I sent her a message back, I think, telling her that I wanted to find out about the nature of her relationship with Father Keating and whether there was anything inappropriate about that relationship.
Well, did it occur to you, given your experience in this area, that sending an email to a stranger, you being an official then of the Archdiocese, is not going to open her up to actually invite her to really tell the truth about what happened to her?
Well, I didn't want to speculate about that. I mean, what I wanted to do was to talk with her and see if we could arrange somebody to speak with her. I mean, she was in Italy. I didn't know if she spoke English or how well she spoke English. So I, initially was trying to get some contact with her so we could get further information.
She did respond to the email, though, in English, did she not?
She did.
So that told you she spoke English?
I had the sense that she did, yes.
And then did you, after she responded to your email, did you make any effort to actually interview her, to make her feel safe, to make her feel like she could open up, to make her feel like there wouldn't be retaliation, to make her feel like, she can tell you what really happened to her?
After I got her response, I had no further contact with her.
Okay. Why not?
It was just, by then, I think the matter was being referred to the Clergy Board, and it was going to be up to them to decide what they wanted to do.
You reported to the Clergy Review Board, did you not, your interactions with the girl in Italy?
I assume I did, yes.
Okay. And in her email responsive to the one you sent to her, she denied denied that Keating had had any inappropriate sexual contact or abuse of her, correct?
I think that's a fair reading of her response, yes.
And that went to the board, did it not?
I assume it did.
And the board ultimately found that the allegations that had been made by, we'll call her Doe, we're going to call her Doe 20 because she brought suit against Keating. Did you know that?
I know that.
Okay. We're going to call her Doe 20. You're aware that the review board ultimately did find that there wasn't, the claim that she had made was not substantiated?
I think that's a fair characterization of their determination.
So Keating was the first that you had made any report to law enforcement concerning who would have been the next?
I'm assuming the next one would have either been Father Jerry Grieman or Father Freddie Montero, although technically Father McDonough was the one that reported Father Montero to the police authorities.
Tell me about Father Jerry Grieman. When did you get information that caused you to believe that a report was appropriate?
I don't know exactly when that information came.
After Keating?
I'm pretty certain it was after Keating, because Keating happened almost simultaneous with my coming into that office, and Father Grieman was at some later point.
And what was the source of the information? And if you don't want to use the name, we'll use the Doe list here.
Yeah, no, the source of the information, I learned about it from Greta Sawyer, who in turn had gotten, I think, an email from this individual who lived out of the country.
Do you remember the name of the individual? I'm not going to ask.
I
you
don't
on the
remember
record.
the name.
Okay. And what did you learn from Greta Sawyer about what had happened or what was
I think Greta
claimed?
actually shared his email with me. And so I think virtually everything I learned initially was in that email.
And what do you recall about this, what had been claimed to have happened?
If I recall, he was doing something like yoga with a yoga master, like some yoga training with a yoga master. And the yoga master had told him, the way you hold your body, you must have been sexually abused. And he said that subsequent to that, he began to recover some memories that he might have been abused by Father Greenman.
And as a child, the email reports that he was abused as a youth
I think
by
that was
Father Greenman.
I don't know that it was necessarily clear, but I think it was pretty obvious.
All right. And when you receive the information that the individual whose name you don't remember at the moment is reporting abuse by Greenman, what did you do with that?
Again, I quickly conferred with Father McDonough. I knew that the events that this gentleman was describing had occurred when Father Greenman was pastor of the Church of St. John the Baptist in New Brighton. So Father McDonough and I quickly determined to report it to the police in New Brighton.
And how soon after having received the information did you and Father McDonough decide to report and actually make the report?
And again, I think that was probably within days, is my recollection.
What is your understanding about how quickly a report should be made upon receiving information suspicious of sexual abuse?
Well, if it's information that's covered by the mandatory reporting statute 626.556, the statute says it should be reported immediately, and they define immediately as to be reported within 24 hours.
And did you consider this to be under the purview of 626.559?
556. I do not.
556.
I did not.
Was it you or McDonough that actually made imparted the information to law enforcement?
I was the one that called the police.
What'd you tell them?
Basically, what I had learned from this email.
Did you? What action was taken by the police?
Well, they very quickly said that because it was so old, they weren't going to do anything about it, and the officer, a female officer, said that she would give me a case number to prove that I'd reported it, but that she was not going to take any action. Apparently, she felt that we didn't have enough information to give them, and I said, well, I'm giving you everything I have.
Well, you imparted to them what you had learned in the email from Greta Sawyer, correct?
Correct.
And that's everything that you had gave to law enforcement, correct?
Correct.
Did you go back to the Greenman file and review the Greenman file and see if there had been other complaints and/or reports made concerning him?
I don't know if I did that or not.
Do you remember having done that today at all?
I don't remember one way or the other whether I did that.
Did you tell law enforcement we keep priest files, some of which are secret, but nonetheless we keep priest files, and we're prepared to turn that file over to you to see if there are other instances of sexual misconduct?
Well, first of all, I don't understand the characterization secret, but I would not have discussed with the police officer anything about the file.
Have you at any time ever turned any files concerning priests accused of sexual abuse over to any law enforcement agencies, either at the time you made reports or subsequent to having made the reports?
Yes.
When? Was the first time you ever turned a file over to law enforcement?
I think during the period of time that I was chancellor, probably involving Father Wenthy.
Yeah. Any other files that were turned over to law enforcement by you?
I think that since January 1st of 2013, when I switched my status from being the chancellor for civil affairs to being a consultant, there's been a number of occasions where we've turned files over to the police in one way, shape, or form. I haven't been directly involved in that, other than I was involved somewhat in matters pertaining to Father Shelley.
Okay, we'll get to that. Is it correct to say then that the only file that you turned over to law enforcement while chancellor would have been that Wenthy file?
That's, as I sit here, that's the only one I recall. Yes.
And what's the next report in time then made by you, if any others,
Well, I
beyond
was-
the Keating agreement?
I was somewhat involved in the reporting of the matters involving Father Freddie Montero.
Okay, before we get to Montero then, did you confront Father Greenman and ask him if he in fact had engaged the youth in sexual abuse as had been reported?
I wouldn't describe it as confronting Father Greenman. There was at least a couple of occasions where I talked with Father Greenman by telephone. He was living in Arizona, I believe.
Did you ask him if he had abused that kid or any others?
I did, and I think he was also interviewed by Richard Setter, if I recall correctly.
Did you ask him before it was turned over to Setter or after it was turned over to Setter?
Well, I think we gave him a heads up that the matter was going to be investigated by Mr. Setter.
And Setter was a private investigator retained by the Archdiocese to do
Correct.
investigations.
Correct.
When you first asked him, did you ask him if he had abused this kid or any others?
Correct.
What did he say?
And I don't know that I asked him that question. I think I shared with him the information that we had obtained. We had spent a fair amount of time trying to get additional corroborating information from the individual. Greta Sawyer had communicated with him, sending a list of questions, helping us to get further information, none of which was forthcoming. I had at some point in time met with the man's father, who had no further information that was helpful to either corroborate it or refute it. So at some point in time, I would have notified Father Greenman of what we were dealing with, and he would have volunteered that he never abused that individual or any other individual.
Well, you had dealt with clerical offenders before, and you knew even if they had offended, more often than not they denied having offended when confronted, correct?
Actually, my experience is more often than not they've admitted it as opposed to deny it.
How many have admitted it to you that they...
Well, if you're talking about matters that have been in litigation since about 1985, I would say probably 90% of them have admitted it in some fashion.
Well, our experience differs very dramatically there.
Okay.
Did you tell anyone in Arizona? Father Greenman was then in ministry when you made the call, wasn't he?
I'm not sure what his status was down there. He was on some kind of like I don't know that medical retirement was a good word for it, but I think he was doing some ministerial work in Arizona, but I wasn't certain what.
Did you or anybody from the Archdiocese notify anyone in Arizona to whom he was doing ministry that an accusation of childhood sexual abuse had been made against him?
It's my recollection that somebody, Father McDonough or Archbishop Flynn, notified them of what we had learned. And if I recall correctly, there was at least a letter as well that conveyed some of that information.
Notified whom? The pastor with whom he was working?
No,
or?
I think the bishop of the diocese.
Okay. And do you know if the bishop notified the parishioners or the public or anybody else?
I don't know what they did in Arizona.
And after you spoke with Greenman, you indicate that Setter became involved. That means that the Archdiocese retained Setter to do an investigation, correct?
Correct. Since the police were not going to investigate it, and thus we wouldn't have the opportunity to have some determination made by the police of whether the matter had occurred or not, we engaged the services of Richard Setter to conduct an investigation.
Because you hadn't looked at the file, did it occur to you that there may have been information in the file that, if known to the police, may have caused them to be more interested in investigating it because there could be evidence of other crimes or evidence of other reports of misconduct in the file?
I don't know that I don't know that I looked at the file, quite frankly. I don't recall one way or the other whether I looked at the file, so I didn't make that determination.
Did you, at any time, what was your involvement concerning the Greenman matter after it got turned over to Setter? for investigation?
Well, I think ultimately Richard Setter wrote a report that was returned to the Archdiocese. Subsequent to that, I think that it may have been reviewed by the Clergy Review Board to determine whether they thought any further steps needed to be taken.
And what finding did the Clergy Review Board make?
I don't know that it made a finding. It didn't have any, I don't recall it making any recommendations about any further action steps.
Well, do you recall it having made the same finding they did in Keating, that the allegation was unsubstantiated?
I don't think it was referred to them for that purpose as it had been in the Keating matter.
Well, what purpose was it referred to them for then?
I think just to have another set of eyes look at it to see if there was any further steps the Archdiocese should be taking.
In any case, no restriction was placed on Greenman as a result of the report, the investigation, or the review by the review board, correct?
To the best of my knowledge, there was no restriction placed on Father Greenman by the Archdiocese or its Archbishop. I don't know what they did in Arizona. One other thing that I did, which may come within your question, is I ultimately had a meeting with the then pastor and staff, some of the staff, at the Church of St. John the Baptist to share with them, what had been done, what was going on.
Who, if anybody else, have you reported then to law enforcement?
As I mentioned a moment ago, Father Montero.
Okay. When would that have been?
No, I don't recall what year that was. I can't remember what year it was.
How did the information come to you?
Father Montero was apparently engaged in a relationship with an adult woman. And she came in to see Father McDonough and told him about their relationship. And apparently in telling Father McDonough this, she also described her belief that she didn't know if she had observed it or if it was a dream or what, but she thought that Father Montero may have sexually abused her daughter. While Father McDonough was meeting with the woman, he came up to my office and related this to me and said, I'm assuming this is a mandatory reporting situation because it was something that had occurred shortly before his meeting with this woman, so it was well within that 3-year period. So we discussed that briefly in terms of whether or not the woman was imparting this to him as part of any pastoral relationship that might be privileged, and he said it was not. She was reporting this to report it. And so I said, well, it clearly appears to fall within the mandated reporting statute, and we should get it reported. And he said, who should we report it to?
And he asked you that?
He asked me that.
Okay. And you answered?
Well, I told him that I thought it was very helpful if we could get it reported to somebody that would take immediate action. If you've read newspaper reports recently, it talks about the number of child abuse reports that nothing ever happens. I think the recent statistic they were talking about in the state of Minnesota, some 68,000 child abuse reports are made each year. About 48,000 are dismissed with nothing being done. We want...
Well, no action taken. They're
Right.
not dismissed.
Right.
Oftentimes it's
No
statutes
action
of
taken.
limitations and a lot of other reasons. So let me get back to the question, Mr. Eisenzimmer, and that is this. What police agency was a report made to?
Well, ultimately to the Minneapolis Police Department.
Okay. And by whom?
Father McDonough is the one that actually talked to the officer.
Okay. Any other situations where you have made a report to law enforcement?
Well, I was involved in the report that was made regarding Father Waymeyer.
Any others?
Not that I recall as I sit here. There was others, I think, that came to the attention of the police in some way, shape, or form, but they had already been reported by the time we became aware of that.
Okay. You made mention of Richard Setter and Associates, and it's also evident that they have been retained and had been retained by the Archdiocese to do investigation a number of times, correct?
Correct.
Concerning allegations of childhood sexual abuse, and do some investigation for and hired by the Archdiocese, correct?
And it's not been limited to that subject matter. Richard Setter's investigated other things for us as well.
Sure, but let's talk about the childhood sexual abuse ones
Okay.
then. Can you give me a gross estimate of how many times you're aware they got hired to investigate childhood sexual abuse allegations?
While I was Chancellor for Civil Affairs?
At any time.
Well, I mean, I know that during the period of time I was outside legal counsel for the Archdiocese, Mr. Setter's services were utilized at times as well.
Yeah. Can you give us a gross estimate of how many times?
I can't, no.
Okay, it's more than a dozen, is it not?
I would guess it would be more than a dozen if you count all the kinds of things he handled, yeah.
As it pertains to childhood sexual abuse allegations, can you recall any time in which Setter and Associates, having investigated, found that there was evidence of childhood sexual abuse,
Well, I
and
don't-
did not exonerate the cleric?
Richard Setter was never asked to either necessarily substantiate it and reach his own conclusion, or exonerate it and reach his own conclusion. He was asked to investigate it and provide us with the investigative information so that someone could make that determination based upon the facts as he found them.
Can you name any instance in which Setter and Associates were hired to do that for the purpose you described, in which he provided evidence that concluded that childhood sexual abuse had occurred by a cleric?
I don't think in the ones that I worked with him on, but he was doing other cases that I think that there was some substantiation, but I don't remember what they were.
Can you name any case in which he was retained to do this investigation regarding childhood sexual abuse where the report he provided indicated there was evidence of a crime having occurred? And if so, can you name that?
I don't think so, no.
Can you identify any instances which Setter was and Associates were retained to investigate a cleric suspected of childhood sexual abuse, where any disciplinary action was taken by the Archbishop against the cleric investigated by Setter and Associates?
Well, I think I don't recall any while I was Chancellor, no.
Okay. Or at any time?
Well, I mean, I can't discuss what might have been done while I was outside legal counsel. That would be covered by the attorney-client privilege.
You could discuss what Setter did and what action was taken, disciplinary action was taken against any cleric. I'm asking, was any disciplinary action taken against any cleric as a result of any investigation by Setter and Associates concerning child sexual abuse at any time?
Okay.
To your knowledge.
Let me clarify that. There was things that Mr. Setter would have done for the Archdiocese when I was outside legal counsel that I would not have been involved in, so I can't answer that question. Based upon my knowledge, I don't know that I can recall at the moment where there was a case he investigated that resulted in disciplinary action.
Okay. Are you aware of him having investigated any child pornography allegations by any clerics?
Well, first of all, let's clarify the language here. You're using the term
Possession of child pornography.
I'm sorry?
Possession of child pornography.
Okay, if we're talking about child pornography or alleged child pornography, I think there was a case involving Father Shelley where Richard Setter was retained apparently by the Archdiocese in some fashion.
Were you involved in that?
I was not at the time he was retained, no.
When did you first become involved?
In probably early 2012.
Okay. And when did you first learn that he had been, Setter and Associates had been retained and at all in connection with evaluating that?
I probably learned that I'm guessing sometime in either late 2011 or early 2012.
Do you and did you consider, either while chancellor or any official capacity with the Archdiocese, the possession of child pornography, the equivalent of also childhood sexual abuse?
Well, I think if you look at the language of the Minnesota Child Abuse Reporting Statute, that child pornography is considered a form of abuse, sexual abuse of a child, it can fall within that statute.
And the possession of it is illegal, is it not?
The possession of child pornography is illegal.
Okay. Are you aware of any other investigations done by Setter and Associates into allegations of possession of child pornography by clerics, besides Shelley?
I am not.
Okay. The last one you mentioned that you were involved in having made a report concerning abuse was Waymire. Let me ask you questions about that.
Okay.
When did Waymire first come onto your radar as somebody who engaged or may have engaged in inappropriate conduct towards youth?
If it relates to youth, that would have been in June of 2012.
Okay. And
by youth, I'm assuming we're talking about a person under the age of 18.
yes.
Yeah, June of 2012.
Okay. And what information did you receive, or from whom did you receive information in June of 2012?
And that I can't tell you because that would be covered by attorney-client privilege. I can tell you what action steps I took subsequent to that, any communication I received, but I can't discuss the communication.
In 2012, you're the chancellor.
Correct. Chancellor for Civil Affairs. There's more than one chancellor.
So, to the question, first we have to lay a foundation to see if there's a privilege. You understand
Sure.
why we have to ask
Sure,
these questions.
that's
So,
fine.
okay, first, in June of 2012, you received some information concerning a suspicion of sexual abuse of youth by Waymire, correct?
I'm not going to discuss the substance of the information I learned. I will tell you that in June of 2012, I learned some information that caused me to take certain actions relative to that, and that those actions related to Father Waymire and the question of whether or not he had sexually abused a minor.
Before June of 2012, had you ever reviewed, before receiving that information, had you ever, as chancellor or otherwise, reviewed the file of Waymire?
I had reviewed some information in his file, yes.
Why?
I think it was 2009, there was a question, I think ultimately there was going to be a merger of two parishes, Blessed Sacrament and St. Thomas in St. Paul. Father Waymire was the pastor of one of them, or a parochial administrator or something, and the Archbishop was apparently considering naming him pastor of the other one, or parochial administrator or something. And the Archbishop raised the question about whether the matter should go to the Clergy Review Board. And so I didn't know anything about Father Waymire at the time, so I was trying to determine what was the situation, and I was also trying to determine, for the Archbishop's benefit, whether his appointment to the one parish he was then at had gone through the Clergy Review Board.
And had it gone through the Clergy Review Board?
As near as I could determine, it had not. The assignment that he was in had occurred prior to my becoming chancellor, So it was prior to my being involved with the clergy board. And certainly no matters involving him had come to the clergy board during the period of time that I had been there, from late 2005 until this point that I'm talking about in 2009. So I also contacted Father McDonough to find out what he could tell me about the matter and whether it had gone to the review board or not.
When
Excuse me. So then I reported this all back to the Archbishop.
and when in 2009 you did look at the Waymeyer file to make the kind of determination you were trying to make, did you see in the file anything that concerned you about his fitness to be in ministry and around youth?
Certainly there was questions that had been raised about his conduct. I didn't perceive myself as being the person responsible for determining fitness for ministry, and certainly there was nothing in there that suggested that he had behaved inappropriately with youth under the age of 18. And again, this is information that I took some of that out of the file, put it in a memorandum, I believe, to the Archbishop to help him decide what he wanted to do with Father Wayman relative to referral to the clergy review board.
Waymeyer.
Excuse me, Waymeyer.
Yeah. Do you recall noting in the file there were concerns about him controlling his sexuality in the seminary?
Could you repeat the question?
Do you recall on review of the Waymeyer file noting that there were concerns about him being able to control his sexuality in seminary?
I don't recall specifically what was in that file. I would have imparted certain information to the Archbishop.
Do you recall in review of that file that there was documentation that he had tried to pick up 18 or 19-year-olds at Barnes & Noble, asking them if they were horny?
I don't know what his purpose was. I do recall there a description in the file of a matter at Barnes & Noble.
You recall in the file that it reflected he had actually been sent to St. Luke's for evaluation?
I believe that the file contained information indicating he had gone to St. Luke.
Do you recall that the file reflected there was a diagnosis of a sexual disorder?
I don't recall what the diagnosis was.
Do you recall that in the file it reflected that the Archbishop in 2005 had been informed of another similar incident to the ones at Barnes & Noble that had been reported earlier, occurring in Jerusalem?
Occurring in
Egypt or Jerusalem?
I don't recall that.
Do you recall on review of the file that in 2006 he was noted to have been cruising to pick up people for sex at parks?
What I recall is a description in the file that he was seen around a park that was a known hangout for people cruising for same-sex relationships. If I recall the description, they weren't describing him as cruising necessarily, or that he had made any attempts to pick up somebody. But I do recall a discussion of some park in St. Paul.
Do you recall that he had been identified as a sex addict?
I do not.
Do you recall that he was on monitoring at the time you reviewed that file?
I do recall that he was on monitoring because if I'm recalling correctly, I think the memorandum I wrote to the Archbishop mentioned that he was being monitored by Tim Rourke.
And the monitoring program was, what did that signify to you that he was being monitored by Tim Rourke?
Just that there was a lot of people that were monitored by Tim Rourke for a variety of reasons to help them maintain whatever aftercare requirements they would have, depending on what the situation was. And so that told me that, they were working with Tim Rourke in the promoter of ministerial standards office.
Based on your review of that file and what you saw in it, did you tell the Archbishop or any other top official maybe Waymeyer should not be active in ministry?
Nobody was asking me to impart any judgment regarding those things. That's not a function that I would have ever fulfilled within the Archdiocese. No one included me in any discussion of anyone's fitness for ministry.
Well, did you think it?
That wasn't the purpose for which I was reviewing the file. If that was the purpose, I would have probably reviewed, far more of the file. The limited review that I was performing at the time was to answer the Archbishop's question in terms of referring the matter to the clergy reviewer.
Yeah, and the ultimate question was, should we continue this guy in ministry and place him into a parish?
I didn't know what the ultimate question was, other than that they were considering putting him in a second parish. He was already in one.
So the question was, ultimately, is he safe? Right?
No, that wasn't in my mind the question. The question was, is this a matter that should go to the review board?
Well,
in fact, what I was trying to tell the Archbishop was, is this a matter you want to go to the clergy board if it didn't go to the clergy board when he had the first parish, in essence?
Well, is it?
Back on the video record.
All right. I had asked you if, on review of the file, you had concerns about the safety of Waymire and youth, and did you tell anybody about that? And I think you said it wasn't your job.
Well, what I'm saying here.
Testified to.
Oh,
Let me
ask you a question, and then we can see.
Okay.
First, after you reviewed the file of Waymire, at that time you knew he was being considered for ministry, correct? And there's a question whether he should continue in ministry as a pastor or as an administrator or be removed, correct?
No, that wasn't the question. I wasn't being asked to express any opinion about his fitness for ministry or continuing in ministry. The only question that was being asked of me was relative to the status of referring his appointment to the clergy board.
And the purpose of the clergy review board and the purpose of the Archbishop asking to do that was to determine whether or not he should continue in ministry and in what capacity, correct?
No, again, the Archbishop was talking about referring him to the clergy board, and so I knew that it was being important for the Archbishop to know whether or not his previous appointment had gone to the clergy board. So I reported to the Archbishop the matter didn't go to the clergy board the last time, so what do you want to do this time? That was the sole purpose of my going back, and I put that all in a memorandum, I believe, to the Archbishop.
So, did you, when you reviewed the file before you reported that to the Archbishop, have concerns about Waymire's sexual history and safety? Did you have concerns?
That wasn't something I was looking at the file for.
I know, but you may not have been asked to look at the file, but when you looked at the file, didn't it raise red flags for you and say, wait a minute, there are a number of things in this file that cause me concern? Yes or no?
Well, there was certainly history in that file. I didn't characterize it. I didn't evaluate it. I didn't make a judgment call in terms of what was going on. That wasn't what I was being asked to do. The Archbishop was not seeking any input or any opinion from me relative to his fitness of ministry, so that wasn't a matter that I, devoted any attention to. That was not ever something the Archbishop ever asked me about someone's fitness for ministry.
I'm not talking about fitness about ministry. I'm talking about safety here.
Well,
okay?
Again, to me, those are somebody who's not safe is not safe for ministry.
Did you have concerns about the safety of Waymire based on that review of him being in ministry?
Concerns about what?
About him being around youth?
No, I
not
did
at
not.
all.
No, there was no indication in the file that he had been involved with youth inappropriately.
And did it occur to you that you knew the Archbishop had not reviewed the file, correct?
I did not know that.
Did you tell the Archbishop? I reviewed this file. There's some information in there I think you should know.
What?
And so you should go back and look at it, or I need to tell you about it.
What I told the Archbishop is in a memorandum.
When, I may have asked you this, but did the Waymire matter go before the Clergy Review Board at that time?
No.
Why not?
The Archbishop apparently decided not to send it to the Clergy Review Board.
Did you disagree with that decision?
I didn't agree or disagree with the decision. It was his decision. I don't decide, whether his decision is right or wrong.
Actually, the Archbishop is the one that can decide whether to send it to the Review Board or not.
Correct. He is the only one that can decide that.
And he doesn't actually have to even send it to the Review Board if he doesn't want to, correct?
That's correct.
They're simply advisory appointed by him, correct?
They are advisory appointed by him.
And I guess you as Chancellor are in a similar role, advisory appointed by him.
Correct.
Okay. Did he tell you why he chose not to send it to the Review Board?
He did not share that with me. In fact, I never spoke to him, nor did he necessarily ever share with me his reasons for making whatever decision he made.
At that time, there was a dispute among some of the officials about whether he should be actually continued in ministry at all, wasn't there?
I don't know that.
Do you recall Jennifer Hasselberger raising concerns?
I only learned of that more recently, probably since she resigned, that she had apparently raised some concerns about Waymire. I did not know that at the time.
Did anybody raise concerns about him continuing in ministry or being a pastor at that time?
In 2009, when he was being considered for that appointment, I don't think I didn't hear any concerns raised at that point in time.
Was Father Laird involved in the process at that time?
I don't know that. I didn't have any involvement with Father Laird in 2009 when they were considering Father Waymire for that appointment.
Do you recall there was an actually decree by Archbishop Nienstedt appointing Waymire to be pastor at Blessed Sacrament?
Well, at some point I learned that he was appointed to the second parish. I don't know when I learned that. I think he probably would have been appointed, I'm guessing July 1 of 2009, but I don't know when I learned that.
Did you, or to your knowledge, anybody from the Archdiocese inform the folks at Blessed Sacrament what had been known about Waymire's history?
I don't know anything about that. I wouldn't have been involved in that. Except, let me clarify that. Once the police were involved in 2012, I did have communication with trustees at that point in time.
Okay, we'll get to that. We're in the 2009 period now, though.
No, I was not aware of any communication to the trustees. I wouldn't have been involved with that.
So, in any case, you learned that he had been continued in ministry with full faculties, even though he was under monitoring, correct?
Well, I don't know that I would have known he had full faculties. I knew I would have known he had some kind of faculties, but what restrictions were on him and the like, I was not completely aware of those, probably.
Do you recall if he was appointed as pastor or business administrator?
I think he was probably appointed as pastor because those parishes subsequently merged, and he was pastor at the time of their merger.
Did Archbishop Nienstedt express to you concerns, or that he was weighing conflicting opinions about Waymire's safety to be in ministry at that time?
If we're talking about 2009, there was
Yes.
never a discussion with Archbishop Neinstedt about anything related to the fitness and ministry of Father Waymeyer.
Did Archbishop Neinstedt tell you then, or at any time, why he didn't turn Waymeyer over to the Clergy Review Board for their consideration?
And I've never had a discussion with him where he's imparted to me any information about that.
Were you able to discern from your experience and your position what criterion he used to turn a matter over to the review board or not turn it over to the review board as he chose to in the case of Waymeyer?
No, I could not ascertain any criteria that he would use for that purpose. There was very few occasions where things were referred to the board.
In 2009, on the question of sexual abuse and clerics and continuation in ministry, who was Archbishop Neinstedt's, in your view, primary consultor or advisor?
Talking about sexual abuse of minors.
Yes. To whom did he look the most?
Well, I would say both his Vicar General as well as Father McDonough, who was then serving as Delegate for Safe Environment. Father McDonough was Vicar General for a short period of time after Archbishop Neinstedt became Archbishop of St. Paul, Minneapolis. But then he was replaced by first then Father Pichet, now Bishop Pichet, at which time Father McDonough was Delegate for Safe Environment. So typically it would have been the Vicar General and Father McDonough.
McDonough went from Vicar General to Delegate for Safe Environment, and I at least interpreted him to say that he pretty much looked to McDonough for the handling and advising of matters pertaining to the sexual abuse. Is that your experience?
Well, there's probably two experiences. One was with respect to matters that had already arisen prior to Father McDonough becoming Delegate for Safe Environment, so everything up to sometime in, 2008, I suppose. Then there was new things that would occur after Father McDonough was no longer Vicar General. Certainly for that earlier period of time, he would look to Father McDonough. So, for example, with questions would come up about Father Waymeyer, since those events had occurred prior to 2009, he would look to Father McDonough. If new matters would come up subsequent to that time, he might look to either his then current Vicar General, or if it was a legal question, he would look perhaps to me.
And an example of a legal question would be, do we have to report or not?
I don't know that I ever recall having a conversation with Archbishop Neinstedt about a matter of whether we had to report or not. I think that I've described most of those cases here, and it typically was before him, with the exception of Father Waymeyer, and there I simply informed the Archbishop what we were doing.
Going back to 2009 then, at that time, what was Father Laird's involvement in the hierarchy?
He wasn't.
Okay.
I think Father Laird became Vicar General in November of 2009, if memory serves me correctly. So at the time that Father Waymeyer would have been given that appointment, which I believe was probably July of 2009, Father Laird was not yet on the scene.
After Waymeyer got that appointment to, or was given the appointment by the Archbishop to Blessed sacrament. I think it's Blessed Sacrament, wasn't it?
Yeah, I can never remember which one he was. He was at one of the, it's Blessed Sacrament of St. Thomas. He was at one, and then he was made pastor of both of them.
Yeah, I have Blessed Sacrament, but it could have been both. In any case, sometime after that, did you become aware that he was arrested for a DUI?
At some point, I became aware of that, but I don't recall. I think that was, you know, I don't know that I knew that before probably June of 2012.
Did you learn in 2009 that, or hear anything that he'd not only been arrested for DUI, but that while on monitoring, that Joe Kippers, or is it Kippers? Or
Kippers, yeah.
Kippers was the attorney that he called for that advice?
I never knew that while I was Chancellor for Civil Affairs.
Did you become aware that at the time of his arrest, it got reported in the police report that Waymire had been trying to pick up teenagers to get them to go back to the campground?
At some point, I learned about something relating to a campground, and the only thing I remember learning was that he had said to some young men, "Where's the party?" That's what I remember about that.
And what's your source of having learned that?
I don't even know that. I couldn't tell you that. I probably learned that again as we looked at the matter in June of 2012.
Have you ever seen that police report?
I don't recall that I have, no.
In September of 2009, there's indications that Father Serba was involved with Waymire and under the supervision of Archbishop Nienstedt. Did you have any involvement with Father Serba and Waymire in 2009?
I recall Father Serba sharing with me briefly some matter he dealt with Father Waymire.
And what did Father Serba tell you?
I think he told me that Father Waymire had gone camping, that there was supposed to be another adult there, that the other adult didn't show up, and so Father Waymire was camping with a youth, and that he was going to talk with the youth's mother as well as with Tim Rourke.
And he told you that before he actually talked to the youth's mother?
I think that he was reporting that that's what he had done.
And he told you that he was taking a youth, that is a minor, camping?
The impression I had, it was a person under 18, yes.
Did he identify the kid to you?
No,
Did you then know who it was?
no. I still don't know who it was.
Did you tell Archbishop Nienstedt about that?
I did not.
Why not?
Father Serba at the time was his vicar general. I assume he shared that with Archbishop Nienstedt.
Do you know if he did?
I don't know that.
When he told you that, as one of the advisors and given your experience, did you tell him that is serious information that needs to go to the Archbishop right away?
I did not make any comment of that nature. Father Serba knew that he was concerned about it. He shared that concern with me.
Did you tell Father Serba about what you had found in the file when you reviewed it earlier? About Waymire's history? That there was
No,
concerns?
I did not.
Do you know if Father Serba did call the mother?
Not of my own knowledge. I know that only from news reports that I've read.
But at the time?
Oh, I did not know it at the time. I believe that he was reporting to me that he had talked with the mother. Although I'm less than completely certain about that, but I believe he had talked with the mother about that time.
Actually, Mr. Eisenzimmer reported he told you initially on question that he was going to call the mother. So he must have talked to you before about this before he called the mother. Do you recall saying that?
Yeah, I'm not certain what the sequence there.
Okay. Okay. You are certain that he told you that Waymeyer was taking a kid camping, correct? And he was concerned about that.
There was going to be at least one youth and one adult, is what I recall. But that the adult was not there for whatever reason. And Father Serba felt that that was something that was not appropriate. It didn't pass the appearance of propriety test, so to speak.
Well, given Waymeyer's history, it was suspicious of sexual abuse, wasn't it?
I wouldn't want to speculate to that. There had never been any indication that Father Waymeyer had had sexual contact with anyone, adult or youth.
Do you think it is a Waymeyer or a priest taking a kid camping is suspicious of sexual abuse?
Not necessarily, but the training that we've provided to priests and lay people make it clear that you shouldn't be in those kinds of situations. If for no other reason, then it does raise the appearance of impropriety, and people will question it.
Okay, take the fact that you learned that he's taking the kid on camping trips, and you also knew what had been reflected in the file, some of which we had covered earlier. Given that, isn't those two things together in itself suspicious of sexual abuse?
Again, I wouldn't want to speculate today about it. I know that Father
I'm asking your opinion.
Well, I didn't form an opinion about it. Father Serba had his own concerns about it. He wasn't asking me to do anything. He was simply sharing the information with me, and he was going to take whatever action steps he decided he would take.
Didn't that alarm you, knowing what you knew and had read about Waymeyer?
Well, I didn't. Again, alarm wasn't something that I was, determining. He was already expressing his own concerns. I didn't have to have my own alarm raised. He wasn't asking me to, should I be alarmed about this? He was simply reporting it to me.
But you knew he didn't have the benefit of having reviewed the file the way you had, correct?
Oh, he knew that other Waymeyer was on monitoring and things like that, so he obviously had the background information.
Well, you didn't know if he had reviewed the file, but you do know that he knew that Waymeyer was on monitoring,
Yeah,
correct?
because he was telling me he was going to talk to Tim Rourke. Okay. And that's the only reason he would know that Tim Rourke would be involved, is he knew he was on monitoring.
So then let's just take those two facts. The knowledge that he's on monitoring for a sexual history, that was known to both you and Serba, correct?
Well, again, he hadn't been sexual with anybody, so I would disagree with the sexual history part of it.
Why was he on monitoring?
Well, I don't know. I wasn't involved when he was put on monitoring. There was a number of incidents where he had engaged in conduct that is probably not appropriate for a priest to be engaged in.
It was sexual conduct.
Well, no. He asked somebody if they was horny. That's not sexual contact. He asked somebody where the party is. So that's disturbing, but it's not sexual abuse, or it's not sexual activity, but certainly raised enough concerns apparently in someone's mind to put him on monitoring and have him evaluated.
The report from St. Luke's was in the file that you reviewed, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And it said a lot more than what you just described, didn't it? It described him as having been a sexual addict and having impulse control issues, didn't it?
Well, it said what it said. I don't recall, as I said, what all it said.
Okay, let's take the fact that you knew that he was on monitoring. Let's take the fact that you knew that it had to do with sexual issues. And let's take the fact then that you now are hearing from Father Serba that he is taking a kid camping. Doesn't those three things together in itself set off an alarm for you that says that's suspicious of sexual abuse, and this has got to be reported today.
Object to the form, it also misstates facts and evidence.
There was no discussion about reporting anything. It was, Father Serba was simply informing me of the actions he was going to be taking.
But you knew the law. My question to you is then, why didn't you tell Serba more about what you knew that you knew he didn't?
Again, I didn't need to tell Father Serba. He knew the man was on monitoring. If Father Serba felt he needed any information, he could either get it from the file or he could ask me.
In any case, Waymire was not reported to law enforcement at that time, correct?
Well, there was nothing to report. There wasn't no, impropriety that was being shared with me that had occurred.
The statute says suspicions of sexual abuse, doesn't it? Suspicions of sexual abuse. You cite the statute a number of times here.
Yeah, I don't know that it uses the word suspicions, but it knows there has reason to believe.
Serba was then, when you had this conversation, a mandated reporter, is he not?
If it was a non-privileged communication to him, he would have been a mandated reporter.
Well, he was sharing it with you, so you knew it was a non-privileged communication, correct?
I assume that, sure.
And you're then the advisor to the archbishops and his delegates, which includes Serba.
I was an advisor, yes.
So, answer this yes or no. Didn't this information that you had from Serba and your knowledge of the file from your review of it in 2009 concern you, yes or no?
Objection asked and answered several times now.
I can't answer that yes or no.
Well, did you have concerns?
I've said this repeatedly. Father Serba had his own concerns. I didn't have to have my own independent concerns. He was not asking me to share my concerns. He was simply reporting to me what he learned and what he was doing. That was it.
Waymire's taking kids camping. You heard that? Serba reported that to you,
Well, I didn't
right?
hear that it was kids. I heard there was a youth.
Well, okay, a youth then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Council, before we take a restroom break?
Sure.
Off the video record.
Okay, Mr. Eisenzimmer, going back to the conversation with Father Serba about Waymire, him sharing with you Waymire is taking a kid camping. And him having told you that he learned that, correct?
Well, I don't know about taking the kid. He was camping with the kid, and that Father Serba had learned that.
Okay. And he told you that?
He told me that. That's correct.
And did he tell you from whom he had learned that?
He might have, but I don't recall how he learned it.
Did you make any recording or memo or take any notes of the conversation between yourself and Father Serba concerning Waymire camping with this kid or taking this kid camping?
I did not.
Why not?
It wasn't something that was coming to me from an outside party. I assumed he was already doing whatever was going to be necessary to memorialize that in Father Waymire's file.
You made reference to some appearance of impropriety. Did this information that you got standing alone from Father Serba and Waymire raise an appearance of impropriety to you?
Well, I didn't, again, make a value judgment about that. What we tried
Well,
to
just
teach.
listen to the question.
Yeah.
Did it or didn't it? It's a yes or no. Did that raise an appearance of impropriety to you as chancellor then when he raised it?
Well,
Yes or no?
No, because I didn't have enough information.
Did it raise an appearance of an imminent danger to that child?
No.
Yes or no?
No.
Did it raise a suspicion that required further investigation?
There was no thought given to that by me.
Well, weren't you concerned about the safety of the kid who he had either taken camping or was camping with? Weren't you concerned about that kid's safety? Yes or no?
I shared the concern that Father Serba was sharing with me, was that Father Waymeyer had been camping with a youth alone, and that raised this question about what's the appearance of that, and is that a proper appearance?
Well, appearance is one thing, that's what it looks like, but appearances can also be indications of things. So my question to you is, didn't it alarm you, knowing what you know, that this kid was in danger or may have already been hurt by Waymeyer?
It didn't raise an alarm, no.
And Father Serba, did Father Serba tell you that he was bringing this information to the Archbishop, or he already had brought it to the Archbishop?
He didn't express anything about what he had done with the Archbishop.
Did you tell him to bring it to the Archbishop?
I did not.
Why not?
I didn't have to tell Father Serba what he needed to do.
Okay. As Vicar General, you knew that was something that it's his job to bring it to the Archbishop.
Well, if he was bringing it to me, I was assuming he was bringing it to the Archbishop.
Okay. And do you know if he did?
I don't know that.
Do you know what further action Father Serba took concerning this information about the kid, Waymeyer, and camping?
Only that I learned at some point in time that Tim Rourke was aware of that, so I assumed Tim Rourke had heard it from either Father Serba or someone.
Tim Rourke was aware of what? That the kid...
About this camping thing with the youth.
Tim Rourke was the then monitor.
Correct. His title was Promoter of Ministerial Standards, right. POMS.
And my question then is, do you know what Father Serba did with the information that he reported to you that he had?
I don't know that.
Did he make mention to you of the fact that he was going to call the mother of the kid and did he tell you that?
Well, as I think I mentioned earlier, he either told me he was doing that or had done it. I don't remember which it was.
Okay. And if he hadn't called the mother when he raised this with you, and he told you he was going to, why didn't you tell him to tell the mother what you knew by reason of your review of that file and the possible danger to this kid?
There was no indication on his part that he wanted any input from me about anything. He was simply informing me of what he either was going to do or
So he didn't
Or had
ask,
done.
he didn't ask you,
he did not ask me.
And I also object to the form that states the evidence.
and you didn't volunteer.
I didn't give him any information at that point in time about Father Waymeyer.
If you assume that he had already called the mother, what do you know about what he told the mother?
The only thing I recall is that that he wanted her, that he either had made her aware or wanted her to be aware that it didn't look right for a priest to be alone with youth, which was consistent with the training that we were providing to everyone.
When you use the terms "it didn't look right to be alone with youth," that implies a perception, doesn't it? It doesn't look right.
Well, I think the same can be true of any.
Well, do you agree with that?
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Wouldn't you also agree that in 2009, it's not only doesn't look right, it's wrong for any priest to be alone with a youth camping?
And I think that's consistent with what we were providing in the training, that priests should not be alone with children, either because of the appearance of impropriety or because it might be improper. Yes.
Given the history of this archdiocese, known to you and other officials, it's also a known danger for a priest to be alone with youth.
Object to the form.
Well, certainly sexual abuse takes place in the absence of other people. So yes, it's something that we trained priests like Father Waymeyer that they should not be doing those kinds of things.
So after this information came to you from Father Serba, you are aware, are you not, that Father Waymeyer continued in ministry without further restriction?
I don't know about further restriction. I would not have been aware of any restrictions that were placed on him. I do know that he remained as the pastor of those two parishes.
And do you know if what Serba told the mother?
I don't, other than I've seen, I think, her description of that in a news report.
Knowing what you knew about what Serba told you and the history that you knew about this archdiocese and the fact that Waymeyer was perhaps camping with this youth, do you think the mother should have been told of Waymeyer's history?
I can't speculate to that.
You're the chancellor, it's not speculation. Shouldn't the mother have been told exactly what the archdiocese knew about this guy and his history?
It wasn't my function to determine what she should be told. Father Serba was deciding that.
You're an advisor to the archbishop. Wasn't it your function to advise the archbishop on what should be done when there's a risk of harm to children?
Nobody was seeking my opinion relative to that question.
That's why Serba sought you out. He was seeking your guidance about what to do.
No, he was not. He was not asking for any advice. If he was, quite frankly, I would claim it was attorney-client privilege. Father Serba was simply informing me of what he either was doing or had done.
You're the chancellor.
I recognize that.
And it's your job to report to the archbishop suspicions of dangerous conduct by priests that are brought to you, correct?
Well, I certainly
As
think the
chancellor.
Archbishop expected me to share with him if I had concerns about danger to children.
The records reflect that Waymeyer was continued in ministry after you had Serba had this conversation with you. Did you provide any guidance to Father Serba or the Archbishop about warning the parish or those in it concerning Waymeyer, now knowing what you knew and what the file reflected?
Nobody asked me to share anything about any of those questions.
You're referring to 2009, I assume?
Yes, at this time, yeah.
Nobody asked me to share anything about anything.
Did you share it with anybody?
I did not.
As Chancellor, why not? It sounds like it is.
Father Serba was simply telling me what he was doing. That was the sole purpose for him. He wasn't seeking my opinion. They certainly would never ask me about someone's fitness for ministry. That's the exclusive purview of the Archbishop. So Father Serba was simply telling me the action steps he was taking.
But you are advising them on matters of sexual abuse, and you're taking calls yourself when their reports are being made, are you not?
At times I did receive calls about matters of concern, sure.
So it's part of your job to help handle the safety of children and employ the zero tolerance as promised, and to make sure that priests are not posing a risk of harm to kids, correct?
Well, that certainly would be true if information was coming directly to me. But in this instance, Father Serba already had the information. He was already embarking on, or had embarked on, an action plan in terms of what he was going to do, and he was simply informing me of that. Nobody was asking me to do anything or my opinion about anything. I think I've said that repeatedly here this morning.
Serba was new on the job, wasn't he, at the time he came to you?
Well, I don't know exactly when this occurred in 2009, but I think he had started as Vicar General on July 1st of 2009, so he was there for a short period of time.
So what experience did he have in sexual abuse and handling sexual abuse matters?
I don't know what involvement he had prior to being Vicar General. I knew he also had a delegate for safe environment, and I don't know what he did with Father McDonough in terms of communicating any of this information to Father McDonough.
So knowing what you do know and what you did know in 2009 about the problem of sexual abuse, having handled it as Chancellor and in your role prior to that, what should Serba have done with the information he shared with you?
I can't answer that. I mean, he did whatever he did. I don't know what. All I'm saying is all I know about it is what he told me. Which included that he was going to be talking with Tim Rourke about it.
And Rourke was a monitor, a deacon, was he not?
He was not a deacon.
Well, he was a monitor employed by the Archdiocese to monitor Waymeyer, correct?
As I said a moment ago, he's the promoter, or was the promoter of ministerial standards.
Okay. But that's also called a monitor, isn't it?
Well, that's the function he performed, was to monitor the guys that were being monitored.
And the purpose of monitoring in the case of Waymeyer was to keep the people and the parishioners safe from harm, correct?
Well, I think that was the ultimate goal, but the responsibility was to see that a priest adhered to the monitoring plan that was developed for that priest. Each priest that was on monitoring had a plan.
But the purpose of monitoring was to keep the people safe,
Again,
correct?
that's an ultimate goal, yes.
Okay.
But that's not the only goal.
Well, what is it, to protect the priest?
No, I mean, some guys, for example, were chemically dependent, so that to
Well, we're
help
talking
them-
about sexual abuse here.
Well, you didn't limit your question to sexual abuse. Some of the guys were chemically dependent, so part of their action plan was to keep them, to help them maintain their sobriety. The same
was
with two.
Waymire chemically dependent?
Was he what?
Chemically dependent?
Not to my knowledge, although he apparently had a DUI at some point in time.
He's a sexual addict, as reflected in the file.
I
correct?
don't know that he was diagnosed as a sexual addict. Was that a diagnosis that was reached at St. Luke?
Sexual compulsion, inability to control his sexual impulses, and at one point sexual addiction, yes.
I don't know that that was the diagnosis. I looked at that report sometime in the middle of 2009. I haven't seen it since then.
Well, in any case, when you had the conversation with Serba, then, did you feel confident that he was properly qualified to deal with this in a way that would protect the safety of the child that he had either camped with or was camping with?
I knew that when Father Serba became Vicar General, he had obtained a briefing from Father McDonough about various matters, just like Father McDonough had briefed Bishop Pache before Bishop Serba. So Bishop Serba, or Father Serba at the time, would have known about the monitoring program. He would have known about Father McDonough's work as delegate for safe environment. So it would be, something that Father Serba would be familiar with what resources were available to him should he choose to avail himself of those resources.
The mother of that child reports that Father Serba called her and said that in today's climate we have to be worried about the words you used, the appearance of impropriety and scandal, and it doesn't look right for your son to camp with him, with Waymire, and so you should have other adults present. Is that an appropriate way for Father Serba to have dealt with the information?
Again, I can't speculate as to what might have been the appropriate way for Father Serba to have dealt with that situation. I don't know that there's a hard and fast guideline to that. He certainly needs to both talk with the mother and share with her his concerns, but he also has to take other action steps, such as looking at how it relates to Father Waymire and his monitoring and other related things.
Don't you think, Father, the mother had some right to know what you knew about the review of Waymire's file, that he had a history of sexual addiction and impulse control?
I don't know what, I don't want to characterize what should have been shared with the mother at the time. I can't put myself in Father Serba's place in terms of, what he felt he should do.
You're aware that Waymire sexually abused that child and others after that call was made, aren't you?
I know that Father...
He's in prison for it.
I know that Father Waymire abused a couple youth that he pled guilty to. I don't know if it's the same child or not.
It is.
Okay? I don't know that. I didn't know that until now.
Okay. Having heard that now, today, and now reflecting on what Father Serba told you, either before he made that call or right after it, does that lead you to the conclusion that that mother deserved to know much more than what she was told?
I'm not going to second guess what he did at this point in time.
Do you feel you had an obligation as the Chancellor to do more than what you did with the information given you by Father Serba and the history you knew both about Waymire on review of the file and the problems in this archdiocese?
No.
Objection has to be answered multiple times.
So after Father Serba shared this information with you, what is the next time you had any dealings pertaining to Waymire?
At some point in time, we merged the two parishes, Blessed Sacrament and St. Thomas. And I don't remember exactly when that occurred, but in the run-up to that, there was some issues that were raised.
And tell me what those issues were, and did they pertain to the concerns about Waymire being in ministry?
No, it didn't.
Anything to do with safety?
No. It simply was his capacity to manage the merger and the conflict that would develop among his staff relative to how they would merge a parish, because some people might lose their jobs, et cetera, et cetera.
And your role was to do what? Help guide that? Help advise?
Right, to provide assistance, because if there was going to be employment-related issues, I would need to address employment-related issues. I was the one that was responsible for seeing that all the documents were prepared to accomplish the merger. We would have to work with the trustees, who would have to vote in favor of that parish merger, along with the Archbishop, the Vicar General, and Father Waymire. So I did have responsibility to see that the mergers were accomplished and to deal with whatever legal issues might arise out of that merger.
And at that point in time, to your knowledge, had any parishioner in the parish where Waymire was assigned been told about the history known to the Archdiocese as reflected in the file, or what Father Serba had learned about Waymire and the kid in camping? Had anybody been told about that?
I don't know that.
To your knowledge, nobody beyond Rourke had been told, correct?
Object to the form, the states as customary.
I don't know who else Father Serba talked with other than myself, and he said he was going to talk with Tim Rourke. I don't
Okay,
know.
so your answer is
Yeah, I'm not
Beyond
aware.
Father
If there
Rourke,
was some
you're not-
disclosure made in the parish, for example, I'm not aware of that.
okay. So after the merger issues that you just described, what then is the next encounter or dealing you had pertaining to Waymire?
And that would have been in June of 2012.
Okay. And you said at that time you received a report of some kind. From whom?
I received a communication.
Yes. The communication is from whom?
I'm not going to tell you that. It's attorney-client privilege.
Yeah, but who would come, what may have been said, maybe, but we have to lay a foundation for this. And first, wait, just
Okay.
listen to the question. In order to see if it is a privileged communication, we have to determine from whom it comes. Because you can't know until the person who communicates identifies that. So to assert such a privilege, as you know, you have to identify who communicated it. So the first question, just a moment.
I first of all would disagree with that.
Okay, well, just a
And I
moment.
disagree as well, that's
Just a moment.
incorrect.
So let's just get the question, and then
Okay.
we can have the objection if there is one. So, first let's get the date. What is the date?
June 19, 2012.
Okay. And by what means is this communication made?
I'm not going to tell you that either. It's a communication made to me.
Because of attorney-client privilege.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you anything about the communication.
What time of day or night?
Early evening.
Can you be more specific?
I would say somewhere around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening.
Where were you when you received it?
In Minneapolis.
Doing what?
I was waiting for a meeting to start.
And in what capacity or role? You were then chancellor, correct?
I was Chancellor for Civil Affairs at the time, yes.
And so I get the legal objection for this. Who is the person that communicated information to you at 5:30 on June 19th.
Well, again, I didn't say exactly 5:30. It was approximately 5:30, and I'm not going to tell you who it was that communicated to me
Based on attorney-client privilege.
based on attorney-client privilege.
And you're going to refuse to answer that? The identity of the person that communicated it?
I will tell you that a person known to me communicated with me that it was clearly within the attorney-client privilege because they were seeking my legal advice about a matter. That's all I'm going to tell you.
How can one determine whether there's an attorney-client privilege unless they know who the communicator is? And then you have to go to the next step to make such a determination.
Well, it's-
I object. That's not for this witness to determine, counsel. That's your issue to raise if you need to and research the law on it. This witness has raised an attorney-client privilege for his communication. He need not answer further information about how you figure it out.
And your instruction is not answer?
I'm not instructing him one way or the other. I don't know the attorney-client privilege. Mr. Eisenzimmer has asserted attorney-client privilege, and you don't get to continue to badger him on that issue.
No, I get to ask a question for foundation if you're going to assert such a privilege to see if one exists.
Well, and that's why
I just want the record here. I don't want an argument. I just want to make a record. So let's.
if you want the record, counsel, you should let me answer the question.
Okay. So the question is who, and the answer is
A person, a human person, contacted me seeking my legal advice.
and the means and the manner of that communication.
I'm not going to tell you that.
And the reason for refusing to answer that is?
That could potentially lead to the identity of the person who sought my legal advice.
The length of the communication. How long?
I don't know.
Best estimate.
Well, it was less than an hour.
The relationship of the person that communicated to you. What was it?
Relationship to whom?
You.
At that point, it was a client.
Is it somebody working for the Archdiocese?
I'm not going to answer that. It's a client.
Do you, as a chancellor for the Archdiocese, consider every hierarch in the Archdiocese also to be a client if they seek your advice?
Yes. It's part of my job as the chancellor was to provide legal advice to people within the Archdiocese and its parishes. So that's thousands of people.
There were predecessors to you as chancellor. Belt Fallon was a lawyer and chancellor, but the prior chancellors were clerics, were they not?
Correct.
Michael Connell and Kevin McDonough and
Father
Bob
O'Connell,
Carlson?
Father O'Connell was never,
He was Vicar General, I guess.
he was Vicar General,
So
moderated
it's
the cure.
Bob Carlson and Kevin McDonough?
And there was others as well. Tom Bowell,
Cleric?
they were all clerics. Vowel, V-O-W-E-L-L.
Did you have discussions prior to your appointment with the Archbishop that it would be legally wise to have a civil lawyer such as yourself in this position as chancellor so that you could protect these communications from discovery and avoid liability?
Not at all.
Did you have such a discussion with the Archbishop or anybody else like that?
No, the change became part of the 1983 Code of Canon Law. Prior to that, the 1917 code, clerics needed to be, chancellor needed to be clerics. After the 83 code came into place, lay persons, including women, could be chancellors. So, for example, Sister Dominica Brennan was a chancellor. Jennifer Hasselberger was a chancellor. Bill Fallon was a chancellor. Andy Eisenzimmer was a chancellor. Joe Kippers is a chancellor.
Did you tell this person who you refused to identify that communicated with you concerning Waymire that he or she is a mandated reporter and needs to report this?
I'm not going to tell you what I told my client. That's the advice. That's what's privileged under the statute.
Do you know if this person made a report as a mandated reporter?
Again, I'm not going to tell you anything I learned from this client.
Well, I'm talking about independent of what you learned from that person. Do you know if that person ever made a report to law enforcement?
I don't know that. If we're talking about from sources other than the client, I don't know that.
Was Waymire reported to law enforcement?
Was it?
Was Waymire reported to law enforcement?
He was.
When?
On June 20th.
By whom?
Deacon John Vomostek.
By what means?
Telephone.
At what time?
Approximately 5 p.m.
And to whom did he make such a report?
I believe it was to a watch commander named Axel, A-X-E-L,
What did he communicate?
that he was reporting the priest that he apparently had given Commander Axtell a heads up on earlier.
And what information did he report?
I'm not certain of that. Because I think later that evening, Deacon Vomostek, I think, had some email communication with Commander Axel, too.
Excuse me, off the video record.